What's up, YouTube? Today I'll be reviewing the show Swarm on Amazon Prime. And this show is pretty good. If you haven't watched it, I advise you watch it before this video. But I'm just gonna dive right in. Okay, so the show starts off with a countdown from like 10, and as like the countdown gets closer to 0, you hear like bees get closer and closer, like swarming closer. And then as the time hits 0, we see our main character Dre wakes up, and we see her like immediately go on a search for this show's Beyonce, which is named Nija Hutton. We see her going like a search for like Nija Hutton tickets, and like she tweets, she's like getting those tickets by any means necessary. And she actually did mean that, because eventually, after searching and like activating her card or whatever and looking for tickets, every other ticket is sold out. But like, there's like some standing room tickets for like 1,800 a piece, and she buys two of them. Now, after she purchases these tickets, she tweets about it, how she got them, and like, we see weird replies like someone like, "Oh, I would have gave up my firstborn for those tickets," or "I chose rent over those tickets." Now, this is actually like some real shit. Like you will see stuff like this in real life, and we have seen things like this in real life. Like people were choosing to like go out far to go see certain concerts, and then have like no way to get back home, or like spending rent money, like they just said on the tweets. It's pretty crazy. This show is like about like a fan's obsession or whatever, like with their favorite artist, but it goes left. Now, after tweeting and being happy about getting the tickets, she tries to go tell her friend that she bought them tickets, but she comes to find she's getting her cheeks beat in by her boyfriend Khalid. Now, it's weird because like she just stands there and like stares at Marissa and Khalid clapping cheeks, but it's even weirder that like Khalid looks over and sees her there, and he like gives her the head nod like, "What's up?" Like still clapping. It's kind of crazy. And then it cuts to Dre going to the store. Now, while at the store, she's like listening to music, but like the person behind the counter is like, "Hey, your friend owes me money or whatever." And as she's saying that, Dre gets like a text on her phone from Marissa, and she's like, "Can you pick up Frenchies?" And she realizes like the transaction hasn't been like completed at the counter or whatever, and she looks up. She's like, "I'm sorry, what?" And the lady's like, "Oh, your friend owes me $5. She came here for condoms and she was $5 short or whatever." And Dre's like, "I don't have $5." And the lady's like, "Pay or I'm calling the cops." So Dre has to like go into her sock and like give her like her last five. Which me personally is like, what does that have to do with me? You could call the cops. I just know the person. I didn't tell her to like be $5 short. That's not me. But it cuts back to the house now, and she has the Frenchies and the stuff from the store or whatever. And Khalid's like, "Frenchies," or whatever, like he's happy that the food is there. And then Marissa comes up and she like, "Oh, guess what? I get to do Drama Queen's makeup tonight or whatever, because her original artist like broke her wrist or whatever, so I'll probably be filling in for like the rest of the tour or whatever." And like Dre's excited for her, but Marissa also is like, "Oh, so can you cover for me at work tonight or whatever?" And of course, Dre says, "Yeah." As you can see, she's kind of a pushover character. But Marissa's like, "Thank you," or whatever, and she sits down with Khalid, and they start eating. And she's like, "Oh, Dre, why aren't you eating?" And Dre's just standing there looking kind of like worried or whatever. But she's like, "Oh, I could cut my po' boy in half for you." And she's like, "Nah, I'm good." And she's like, "At least take some fries." And then Khalid's like, "Oh, don't force the girl to eat if she don't want to. That's how she stay perfect thick like that or whatever." And that's like another like weird thing. Khalid is like a weird character. But then Marissa also asks for Dre's like half of the rent. And Dre's like, "Well, I don't have any more money." And she's like, "What do you mean you don't have any more money? You just got paid." And she's like, "Oh, well, I spent the money on like the food at Frenchie's and the money that you owed the lady at the corner store." And she's like, "Oh, I don't owe that lady anything. She's crazy or whatever. But please tell me you didn't get that lady your money." And then Dre's just looking, and she's like, "Come on, really, Dre?" And Khalid starts laughing. He's like, "You're too nice." And he's like, "You want me to go down there and handle this for you?" And she's like, "No, thank you." And he's like, "You look like you need a man to handle this." And he was also like, "Is that why you always be sucking your fingers?" And Dre's like, "Y'all be talking about me." And Khalid's like, "All she does is talk about you." And Marissa's like, "You my day one. Everybody knows it. He's just jealous or whatever." And he's like, "Yeah, I know all about you. Just looking at your ass, I could tell you a virgin." And he's like, "Shit, everybody could see it. On my mama, I got some homies that'll be down if you down." And he calls her a cherry pie, 'cause, a virgin. But still, it was kind of weird, but I also want you to remember this cherry pie line, because it's going to come back later. But then it cuts to later that day, and Dre's on her bed listening to Nija and sucking her fingers. And the camera like zooms up, and Khalid like taps her on the shoulder. But as he taps her, you just see like a quick flash of like a swarm of bees. And he's like, "My bad, I didn't mean to scare you." And he tells her that he's planning to take Marissa to Atlanta for her birthday. And he's like, "Oh, you should come with us." And she's like, "Oh, I can't. We're going to be busy that week." And he's like, "Busy how?" And flops on her bed. And she's like, "Oh, not just touring that week for her birthday. And I got us tickets to go." And he's like, "Oh, cool, cool. But I thought she said y'all couldn't get those tickets, even the cheap ones. They're like 350 a pop." And she's like, "I got tickets." And he like, "How? You're broke." And she's like, "Oh, it's Nija. Sometimes you gotta make sacrifices." And Khalid's like, "Damn, sometimes y'all be acting like y'all in a cult or some shit." And he's like, "Oh, Nija is like everybody else, right? She takes shits and get fucked by her husband like everybody else." And Dre's like, "She's not like everybody else. She takes what we all thinking and gives it a name. She's a goddess." And he kind of laughs at that, and like Marissa is like, "Oh, come on, Khalid, it's time to go." And Dre's like, "Please don't tell Marissa about the tickets." And as he's walking out, he's like, "We're good," or whatever. And then it cuts to Marissa doing Dre's makeup. And Marissa's like, "You look so good with makeup. Your face is so versatile." And Dre's like how? Like I'm ugly? And she's like, "Oh my God, girl, learn to take a compliment. It means you look good. You look like a snack. Own it." Then she takes a picture and says she's going to use it for her makeup portfolio. And Dre just, looks down on her phone and starts, typing away or whatever. And Marissa's like, "Who you texting? Let me find out you got a nigga you ain't tell me about." And then Dre shows her that it's actually just an old like fan account on Twitter that they used to have, the Swarm account. And she's like, "Oh, you still tweeting from that old ass Swarm account?" And Dre's like, "Yeah." And then she's like, "Dre." And she's like, "What? I like it." And she's like, "I did too when we were teenagers." And Dre's like, "They're my friends." And Marissa's like, "They're not your friends. They don't give a fuck about you. They're not real." And then Marissa gets behind Dre and she's like, "You look good," while looking at her in the mirror. And we see like Marissa's arm over Dre's shoulder, and Dre like pulls it down and sees the scar on her arm. And she like starts to kiss the scar. And Marissa's like, "You don't have to do that every time you see it, right?" And Dre's like, "Sorry." But Marissa's like, "You're weird, but I love your passion. I need some of that." And then she goes to the bed. She's like, "Come here." And as soon as she sits down, she like blows weed smoke on her face. And Dre's like, "Stop." And Marissa's like, "Weed is a grown ass woman's drug. Stop being a baby." And Dre's like, "I don't like how I think when I smoke." And Marissa's like, "It'll help you make friends here, here," and like makes her smoke. But they lay down and they continue to smoke, and Dre's like, "What do you think she's doing right now?" And Marissa's like, "Who?" And she's like, "Nija." And she's like, "Who knows?" But she's like, "Oh, if I had to do her makeup one day, I don't think I could touch her face. My hands would be shaking too much." And Dre's like, "I don't think I could breathe. I just die." And Marissa's like, "We have to meet her one day. Promise me." And she's like, "Okay." Then Dre's like, "I think the second she see me, she'd know like we're connected." And she would invite us back to dinner to go to her house. And she's like, "Do you think we actually be able to meet her one day?" And Marissa's like, "If anyone's crazy enough to meet Naja Hutton, it's you." And then it just cuts to like Dre waking up in the bed in the morning. But she's getting text from Marissa basically like saying she's late or whatever. She's like, "Where are you?" And we see Marissa's boss and Marissa as well in the mall just talking about the boss getting dick pics from like some guy, but then we see Dre like rushing into the mall looking horrible, like makeup smeared on her face, hair looking crazy, and she's just walking up looking crazy, and then they're like, "Oh no, oh no," and she's like, the boss is like, "You look like shit," and she's like, "Yes," and she's like, "You're late," and she's like, "Yes," and then she's like, "You can't work while looking like shit," and she's like, "Do you want me to go home?" And then Marissa's like, I got her. And the boss is like, thank you, Jesus Christ. And she was like, Marissa, the smoking made me late. And Marissa's like, nigga, it's not like I gave you meth. Did you even brush your teeth? Come on. And she takes her to like go do her makeup and like fix her up in the bathroom. It's a funny scene. But while she's doing her makeup, she's like, I thought you said Erica was. Oh yeah, Erica is the name of the boss, by the way. But she's like, I thought you said Erica would transfer to Oaks Mall. And she's like, she did, but she's doing both malls. And she's like, all she talks about is sex, and she always has food stuck in her teeth. And Marissa's like, stop it. She helped me with my makeup gigs. She's a good person. And she's like, she doesn't know that I'm doing the makeup thing tonight. So just play it cool and like, try not to make it obvious that you covering for me. But Dre's like, okay, I love you, Marissa. And Marissa's like, I know, Dre. And it cuts to them at the food court talking to Erica. And Erica's like, oh, are you going to Vanessa's party on Saturday? And she's like, I met this dude that's going to be DJing at 77 Degrees or whatever. And there's free drinks for ladies after like 1. And she's like, oh, he told me to bring all my cute friends. And Dre's like, can I come? And Erica's like, you don't drink. You just sit there and watch. It makes me nervous. And Dre's like, well, I could watch you from someplace you can't see me. And it's like really awkward silence. It's kind of funny. And then it cuts to Khalid showing up later that night at the job. And he's like, where's Marissa at? And Dre's like, oh, she's gone or whatever. I took over her shift. And he's like, well, welcome me then. I need you to help me. It's for Marissa. What perfume do you think that she would like? And Dre's like, oh, well, she likes the color purple. But he's like lavender? And she's like, I don't know, I guess. But he's like, you're a funny one, You and Marissa don't really be looking like sisters. I can't really put my finger on it. Maybe it's your face shape or something. But you be hiding your shit, though. You're filled out nice, cherry pie. And he, like, wraps his arm around her, and he's like, can we be friends? God damn. You be acting like you don't like me. And he's like, niggas fuck with me or whatever. But she's like, you said Naja isn't special. And he's like, nigga, this about Naja? And she like, if Naja isn't special, then none of us aren't special. And he's like, the fuck are you, 12? It is a funny little moment, but it's like, damn. And she's like, no. But he's like, look, I'm sorry for dissing Naja. Can I give you a ride home after work or whatever? My car is nice. My shit be swinging. And she's like, I'll take the bus. I got to lock up anyway. And as she's walking off, he grabs her and he's like, hold up now. You really don't want to talk about it? And she's like, talk about what? And he's like, I seen your scary ass spies watching me, spying on me and shit. And he's like, you look like you like what you saw. You ain't got to be no virgin forever if you don't want to. Pretty much like, shooting his shot at her. And I'm like, nigga, you're dating a sister. But he gets real close to her face like he's trying to go for a kiss. And she's looking like, the fuck? And she just walks off. But she goes back to like where she's supposed to be working for Marissa. And she comes back to see like young niggas is definitely like vandalizing and stealing from that part or whatever. And there's like this angry mom there. She's like, oh, do you work here? My son bought this shirt and I want to exchange it. And then Dre calls Marissa and lets her know what happens. And Marissa has to come back to come pick her up or whatever to take her home. And as soon as they get in the house, Marissa's like packing up or whatever to leave. And Dre's like, where are you going? And she's like, out. And she's like, but where? And she's like, what are you, my parole officer now? And she's like, no. And she's like, oh, I'm going to Khalid's for a while. And Dre's like, I'm sorry. And Marissa's like, you keep saying you're sorry, but I'm probably fired. But it's okay because I'm going to quit tomorrow anyway. Vanessa knows this lady that wants to interview me. And I'm going to go, do that. And she's like, But this is good anyway. Space is good for us because it's a lot. Working and living together and paying both halves of the rent is a lot. And Dre tries to like say, "Oh yeah, I got us tickets to Niger," and like in hopes of like being forgiven. And Marissa's like, "What? You're broke." And she's like, "Oh, I got them earlier," but she's like, "Oh, Khalid's taking me to Atlanta for my birthday, and when we move back, I'm gonna move in with him." And Dre's like, "Why are you doing this to me?" Marissa's like, "Oh, I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing this for me." And she's like, "You really want to live with him?" And she's like, "Yeah." And Dre's like, "You barely know him." And Marissa's like, "Oh, you're giving me relationship advice now?" But Dre's like, "Oh, he's no good for you." And Marissa's like, "Okay, I'm over this." And she's like, "Over what?" And she's like, "Every guy I bring around, you have a problem with. Everyone." And Dre's like, "Well, they're all awful. They're all dumb." And she's like, "Tonight, Khalid came to the job and he like tried to have sex with me. He's a cheater. He doesn't deserve you." And she hugs Marissa, but Marissa's just like, stop talking, Dre," and like tries to leave. Then we cut to Dre on the bed, and like her tweets start going off or whatever. Pretty much, someone says that like Naja gets cheated on, and someone's asking for like a link to the festival or whatever. And Dre like immediately goes to go like watch the music video on YouTube, I believe. And the way they shot this scene was pretty crazy. It's like it looks like a regular person just watching TV or whatever. But then like when she sits up closer, it's like the music gets louder and like it looks like kind of hypnotizing, if you will, but it's kind of crazy. And then Dre goes out to a club and finds a guy and starts dancing with him or whatever. And then they start kissing, and the music is like even louder, and like we keep seeing Nija dancing and shit like that. It looks kind of crazy, like I said, but yeah, I like this scene. And then it just cuts to like Dre waking up in the guy's house, and he's butt ass naked, and he offers her like some strawberries when he like hops on the bed, but they show this shot of like his dick like jammed up against the goddamn bowl of strawberries, and then she's just looking like, what the hell? But she's like, "Do you have a bathroom?" And she goes in the bathroom to charge her phone, and he's like, "Oh yeah, where are you from?" Like outside of the door, and she's like looking like, what the fuck? But as he's talking, they show like a shot of like all the missed text and shit that she had from Marissa the night before. And they also show like this scene where like Marissa's like, "Pick up, I need you. He cheated on me. You were right." And after that, she like goes back home or whatever and checks the mail and finds the Naja tickets. But she comes to see Marissa on the bed. And she like, "Oh yeah, I got the tickets." And she hops on the bed and like moves her and realizes like she's not really moving or whatever. But she turns her over and finds out that she's dead. Then we cut to like Dre in the hospital trying to see what's going on. And eventually they cut back to like Dre in the house, like in a room on the bed, crying, going through the motions, like different days and shit, eating snacks and shit, still crying. And then they show a shot of like her laying on the couch while like the bank is like taking their shit because like nobody was paying rent or whatever, because Dre didn't have a job, and now Marissa's dead, so yeah. Then it cuts to Dre going back to that store where she had to like pay for the condoms or whatever for Marissa, but she's trying to get a Coke, and I can't tell if she did this on accident or on purpose, but she drops the Coke. It's a glass Coke bottle, and she drops it, and the lady is like, "What are you doing? Now I gotta clean that up and get out of my store." And like her audio like blurs out because Dre is like looking at a piece of glass, and she picks it up and like squeezes it in her hand until like her hand starts bleeding. And then like after this, it like cuts back to like Dre in the house with like no furniture now, watching a older video of like her and Dre when they were younger, fanning out about Naja. Then she goes on Instagram and looks at like a picture of Marissa that she posted where she was like, "R.I.P. Bestie." And she goes in the comments and people are like, "Oh, how did she die?" And they're like, "Oh, she killed herself to like the new album festival." And some guy in the comments is like, "Oh, WTF, Marissa Jackson," and he's like, "Oh, she got what she deserved." And then Dre texts Marissa, and she's like, "I miss you." And then Dre like hears a buzz from like a little bit in like the closet, but she goes in there and she sees Marissa's phone on a charger, and she picks it up and like texts herself back like, "Oh, I miss you too." Then it cuts to Dre going to the funeral, and as she walks up to the body, she's just looking, and then this guy comes up behind her and is like, "Oh, ma'am, you need to leave. The family doesn't want you here." And she's like, "Oh, she's my sister. She is my family." And he's like, "Oh, this is the Lord's day. Please, just leave." And she just goes outside and she like stares at this beehive with like a bunch of like bees swarming around it. She's just staring at it. And as she's staring at it, she sees like this weird like little vision or whatever. It's like a lady moving around, like moving her head around. It looks kind of crazy. It looks cool though. Then she goes to Khalid's house and she's like, "Can I come in?" And he's like, "Yeah, let me put the dog away real quick." So he goes to go do that, and then he lets her in. And as she comes in, she's like, "Is this your house?" And he's like, "Yeah, I grew up here. My parents split up, but yeah, I'm still here or whatever." And he's like, "What happened to your hand?" And she's like, "I cut it on some glass." And he's like, "Oh, you want a beer?" And she's like, "I don't drink." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I always forget that part about you." And they both sit down on the couch, and he's like, "We got in a fight that night. It's just so stupid. You never think it would end on a fight. I wish I knew." Then she's like, "You didn't come to the funeral." And he's like, "I wanted to." And she cuts him off and is like, "But you didn't." And he's like, "I ain't never seen a dead body before." And he's like, "I got dressed and everything, but I just had this tightness in my chest, and I should have been there." And then like he like takes a long pause and just starts crying, and Dre's just looking at him like, "What the fuck?" But she like tries to like comfort him a little bit, like with a couple pats on the back. And then he like weirdly tries to like lean in a little bit. It looks like he's trying to kiss her or whatever, like trying to get like sympathy booty or something. And he's like, "Well, do you want some tea? My mom makes her own tea." Like as he sees this, like she's not falling for it like that way. And she's like, "Sure." And he gets up to go get the tea or whatever. He's like, "Yeah, my mom makes her own tea. It's really good." And as he's talking about the tea or whatever he's talking about, she like picks up this little lamp thing and like runs up behind him, and he doesn't hear anything at all. She just like whacks him in the head, and he falls out, and he's like, "Drake, no, Drake!" And she's like sitting on top of him, just smashing his face. I'm like, "Oh my god, this was very shocking." Like first time around watching, like this scene was just so crazy, and she starts to like freak out, like she can't breathe, but it also like seems like she's gonna throw up. But she immediately goes in the fridge and grabs like a sweet potato pie and starts eating it with her bare hands. But like since her hands are like covered in blood, that's why I like kind of said like remember the cherry pie thing. It's like this is her first kill, and it's kind of like popping the cherry or whatever. But she starts to eat the pie, like that's kind of like a crazy little callback right there. But yeah, that was pretty much it. She killed him, and after she killed him, she like notices the dog that he put away. It's like looking through like this little glass door or whatever, and she's like, "Shit." I don't know what she does to the dog. It like cuts to the credits or whatever, but yeah, this is just like the start of like her murdering journey, and it was just pretty crazy to see. That was the end of the first episode, which was called Stung. But yeah, I'll probably be doing the whole series. I actually want to do the whole series, but for now, this is the end of the first episode. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.